you so much. I've had a great time. I've never been in this area, and I've never had an occasion to feel so mellow. Where I'm from is very cold and nowhere, and I find the people here are so friendly. And so I'm very, very indebted to Perrin and John and Scott, so many people who wanted me here, and I hope to do justice to this lecture. By the way, I'd like to dedicate the lecture to my wife, who had to leave this morning on a 4 o'clock shuttle bus in the morning to get back to upstate. Very few people I've ever met I felt so connected with and so trusting of. And I wish everybody, when you have relationships, will be as happy as I am. So this is to Lisa. The title of this lecture, and I'm not mic'd, so I hope to project here. The title of this lecture is How I Found What I Wanted to Say While Finding Myself. I'm going to start with when I was the first month of being a student at the Cooper Union in New York City. It was then a 3-year school. No a degree yet, it was the 3-year program, but it was very, very important who you meet when you're in undergraduate situations. Anyway, the year before I went, in my last year of high school, in '56, I had the horrible occurrence of being told my father had just tried to commit suicide. And it jarred us. It jarred my sister, my brother, myself, my mother, of course. And it made me really not even attend high school. I was a pretty good student, and I let everything go down. I was very much confused about who I was, being I was this man's son. And he did recover. He was an alcoholic. He was very depressed. He jumped out of off a roof in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, in a 2-story building. Because I think he was drunk, he fell into a tree, not into air. He bounced through the tree and lost the use of his legs, pretty much. And he went downhill further after that. So that was a big deal. And I really was helped by my assistant principal at the high school with my bad grades, because I never was attending high school, to take the competition 3-hour exam for Cooper Union, which, thank God, I got in. So I went to Cooper, and I was hiding in this certain manner of being very confident, but I was just the opposite. And I went into a man called Victor Candel's freshman painting class. And I was this, really showy guy. I wore odd clothes, and I was very insecure, but trying to be secure. And I would make these 2 color, purple and green, little popsicle sticks of cracked wood, and I'd make them into collages. And he would look at me like I had just stepped on his mother or something. He was so angry at me. And I was angry at me too. And in the course of the class that met every week, he would take 1 or 2 students out to the corridor. She or he would set up the work. Victor, who was a Czech Jew, would go upstairs and get from the library a book. And they would come back in 20 minutes, and they were all very happy. And in the course of the 14 weeks of the semester, he would not ask me to go out with him. So the very last class, he had to, for me to have a grade. And I was still doing my little kind of pseudo-important collages. And he just looked at me, and everybody looked at me, and Victor said to me, "Witkin, just stay there." So I wasn't going out with him. So he goes back out of the building to the library, comes back into the room, and he's got this big book, and it's open to Michelangelo's The Pietà. And he throws it into my lap, and I'm looking at this scene of grief. And he says to me, I mean, he's Jewish, and I've been at 8 years of Catholic parochial school, and he's looking at me, looking at the book, and he says to me, Witkin, what you think she's doing? Babysitting? Unlike other crits, this thing changed me. I mean, it made me awake to something. And the something was built in. I feel that everybody has some kind of battery or script that they're reeling out through time. So I was curious about the word pietà. It also means pity. And pity also has a knowledge of itself that one could say it's also a sympathetic sorrow for the other one who's suffering. Degas famously used the phrase, Degas said, we're put here to look at each other. And that moved me too. And in Brooklyn as a child, before television, and we didn't hear much radio, but I would spend my evenings on the stoop in Greenpoint, and with my mother's mother, who's Italian speaking, and I spoke then Italian most of the time, and my grandmother would just look at people, and she would say things like, guardi questi gente tutte queste gente have sorrow and a hard life, she would say. And I thought, well, if my grandmother feels that way, my grandmother is an invalid, she couldn't walk, and yet she never complained. There's something in the family that is maybe interested in people, interested in suffering, and I think what I want to say is that my work really is probably about suffering, human suffering, and how we come to negotiate maybe a body of work that is in the sympathy of people's lives. A quick move before Cooper Union. When I was 15 years old, I had a drawing that appeared in 17 magazine. It's called the It's All Yours issue. And I did a fairly decent drawing of my brother and sister posing at a kind of diner counter thing. It was published, and Art Kane, who's the art director, knew I wanted to draw and would like to go to Cooper Union. And he said, let me give you a great gift. He says, let me send you to the Skowhegan School, and you'll be meeting people whose average age is like 26, but all these very famous people will come up there. And I had never met by that time anybody of great reputation. So because I was only 15 and I was pretty scrawny and anemic, I was given the job of taking this old German from his wife in this cottage. Every morning I would pick him up, and we'd have to walk through the woods. The guy was really a chronic alcoholic, and so my job was to take him through the woods so he wouldn't hide bottles. He had to be in the studios to paint. And so for 2 months, every day except Sunday, I would take this old German who was only 63. I was 15, but he seemed to be ancient to me. And we walked through the woods, and he would tell me about Weimar, Germany, what it was like to be a painter and artist in that society, how dangerous, how he met Paul Klee at the Bauhaus Studios. And at 15, there's kind of filter, and the filter is the kind of goofiness of being a teenager. And yet, I knew what he was saying to me was very precious and very important. And in the 2 months, he was telling me that an artist should live their lives among people and with history, with contemporary happenings. And that stuck with me. And that artist was George Gross, who had immigrated to this country in 1932. And I think he was an alcoholic because he found out 2 years after the end of World War II that a good percentage, something like 60% of his work was destroyed. Maybe his best work. Anyway, so again, that filter being young and not accepting the world and the strength of how the world delivers itself to us. I was living in Berlin, West Berlin, as a student at the Hochschule für die Bildende Kunst, the Berlin Academy, and I had a Pulitzer Fellowship. And I was very interested in politics all the time. And I wanted to go there, even though it was dangerous, because it was dangerous. And I would find myself going into the East sector, East Berlin, communist sector, to see how that life was, how that society was. And I would go with West German friends. Sometimes I'd go alone. And I would walk the streets. I'd try to buy things in the shops. And all the time there was a sense of fear and terror. And one day I knew it was my last trip out of West Berlin. I had to go back to Rome, Italy. And I decided to take the last trip on the U-Bahn, I think it was, to go into the Alexanderplatz, buy some stuff, take the train for the last time. But just that week, the East German government closed any of its population, forbade them to go into the West. So everybody taking the train from the West was visiting relatives and going as West people back. But no East person, at the fear of death, would take the train. I was kind of aware of this, and as I was thinking about the train moving, going back to the West, this young woman comes in. She's maybe 16 years old. She's nervous. She's wearing a white blouse and a dark skirt, and she's holding a big cello case. And we all knew she was escaping. This child was escaping. I was 21, she was 16, and somehow the filter was melting. The filter, seeing the world. So the train had to go from Alexanderplatz to Stalin Alley, I think, to another stop, then 2 industrial zones, and you were in the West. You were free. Okay. So the train moved, and we kept looking at this girl. I was next to a window, and we got into the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and just at the end of the 5th, we all kind of smiled, and the train pulled out, and the train stopped. The door was ripped open by a Vopo with a submachine gun, a girl Vopo, I guess, and they lunged for this kid. And for the first time in my life, I saw her mouth open, and my ears shut down, and I couldn't take it. I couldn't bear her being taken out. So I turned my neck and continued into Berlin, West Berlin, knowing that I had just seen the loss of a life. I'd just seen the value of democracy, privilege. The veil was off, and I became political. I became aware of real suffering and how it is to live having seen that event. Going now back to the Cooper Union thing, and being a teacher, I really think that what you fall into, what teachers you fall into, what influences you have are all good. When I was at Cooper Union in 57 to 60, being in Berlin in 61, I was really an abstract painter at school, and yet there was something in me wanting to be a figurative painter. So I would, in my mother's house, in the dining room, I stretched a 4x7 foot picture, and for 2.5 years I was making a very large narrative painting, and then I would get up in the morning, go to Cooper Union, and be an abstract painter again. It seems that these two things wouldn't gel, but they did gel eventually, because I do love paint, and I do love the human drama, and somehow it made its own fusion. So again, don't be afraid of being artistic schizophrenics, because something does gel, we hope. When I graduated from Cooper, that got me to Florence and then Berlin. As a kid, even though we had the Metropolitan Museum and the Brooklyn Museum and the Guggenheim, I still wanted to see the great, great paintings of Europe. And I made a beeline, of course, to the Rijksmuseum, the Rembrandts, the Frontals, but I also had to go to see the Grunewalds in the Alsace, in the place between France and Germany. And I spent a whole day there looking at the Grunwald Eisenheim altarpiece. And Kandel's words, babysitting Pietà, got really richer and richer. And I love the fact that an artist could make forms like that Christ form on the crucifix, or the hands of the mother and how she is in that painting, and how one could inform reality for more feelings through human form. Right? So that changed me enormously. The Florence collection of Uffizi, also great stuff. The Giottos, Masaccios, Frangelicos were huge events. When I came back after almost 2 years, back to New York, and everything was pop art. Gone was the crazy existential abstract expressionism, and suddenly we had this very kind of insincere blow-up things. I wasn't aware, but I really missed the seriousness of painting. My work then for some time was collaging, and when I found myself at graduate school, I was 28 or something, I for the first time returned to paint. And to return to paint after many years of collaging, I did what I never did before. I bought a finger painting set that kids use, and I had to kind of put my hands into paint, and I would make these images, cut them out, and make pictures out of the images. And one day I said, I stopped this. I'm going to look at reality and get somebody to look at and paint that. And eventually I did, from still life into seeing people. I got there. I said, even though I'm hip with the art scene, no one is doing the figure, but I need to do the figure. And so I found myself at Syracuse at 32, and the faculty called me an illustrator. I was learning how to paint the figures, I was learning how to do large compositions, and I didn't care what they said. I cared what I was getting at my studio. Over the years, the things change. Some words which are meaningful to me. When I go into my studio, to me, I look forward to it. Time is very short there. It might be 5 hours, but it feels like an hour. And lately I've been thinking about little things I've read that might be of importance. The first thing is, there's a very good Catholic writer called Gary Wills. And he wrote a book 2 years ago called What Jesus Meant. And in the book, he says something that really stirred me. He says, the disciples beheld a multitude lingering after Jesus had spoken to them. The crowd now needed to be fed. The disciples complained that no fish had appeared in their nets for that entire day. Jesus told the disciples to launch their boats and haul in fish. Jesus looked at them and said, go into deep waters and find abundance. So it took all their nets eventually to fill up 3 more boats, and they came back and fed the multitude. The word deep water to me means deep concern and deep wanting activity. And I think time and our endless sense of optimism can bring us to deep water every time we enter that studio. Every time we want something stronger that would take us deeper. The other thing I want to talk about is a television tennis program that I stumbled upon. If I can find my note. Last year there was a tennis match that I was watching. I always enjoyed John McEnroe's comments on seeing players, and they were going to the championship. There's a East European player, a young guy, going against Novak Djokovic, who was then current number 1. So the game began, and McEnroe was commenting on the younger player from an East Bloc country, saying that this kid was not aware of the magnitude, the intense importance of each shot against the champion. And therefore, the discipline to hold each move in one's mind wasn't in this younger player. And McEnroe said he's going against Djokovic and he's merely interested in the game. He said what's lacking is this kid knowing the magnitude of the game. And I want to end there with the idea that, life is short and time goes by fast. And every time you start a project, in my case, I could think of a project that I'm just now coming to grips with 2 paintings that I've thought about for 3 years. And now I'm about to start the pictures. And I'm ready. So the thing is that I don't understand where people live in puddles where they should live in deep water. They should live in the depth of their concern like you're the only painter alive. You're the only one who's going to continue this stuff called excellence or depth. And that's how I feel. So I think there is a kind of sense that instead of avoiding the depth of your concerns, which will give you nothing, enter the depth of your concern and you will learn a lot. My work takes me 2-3 years to make, and I really enjoy the kind of Darwinian little fish becoming a man, the evolution of it all. And I think that compact, that indebtedness to an idea does give results. Okay, that's all I want to say, and we'll show the work.